Thank you very much. So, in this short guest talk, I'm going to provide a practice searcher's perspective on the debate about human intelligence and artificial intelligence in interpreting. By practice searcher is a coined word, but it includes two parts. It means a practitioner and a researcher, which covers two roles of myself. By the way, I also work in the third role. That means that I'm an interpreting trainer working in the conference interpreting and public service and business interpreting program in Leeds. So in this talk, first, I'm going to give a brief review of recent news about AI-enhanced technology or technologies in interpreting and an analysis of the working mechanism of machine interpreting. I will provide a multidimensional epistemological model of interpreting to map the interpreting behavior and activity to the fore and to reveal the nature of interpreting. By doing so, I hope it can provide a conceptual framework or conceptual basis for our discussion or analyzing the question in debate, and more broadly, the relationship or interaction between human intelligence and artificial intelligence in interpreting. So first, as a background, I'd like to mention the recent media hype about new development of AI-enhanced technologies in interpreting. So I'd like to share with you two pieces of news. First, sorry, it's covered by, okay. So first, in 2018, 腾讯翻译君, a translation engine, was first used in the Boao International Forum, which is a major international conference held every year in China, in Hainan. As we can see, this is the news report from the China Central TV station, CCTV. So it says in Chinese that 腾讯翻译君, Tencent's translation machine is being applied for the first time in providing interpreting for various sessions in the Boao International Forum in the language combinations of Chinese and English, Japanese, Korean, French, and Spanish. And here is a screenshot of the conference. As you can see, it might give you some idea about how it does. So it transcribes or voice recognize the speech in Chinese. 最好是别占明天，合理一般差的时候私下来吗？I believe among our participants, there are some Chinese speakers. I wonder whether this makes sense to you. And then in terms of the translation, it provided, it says, the best is the best. The best is not tomorrow. When it's reasonable to tell it off, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So here, we're all English speakers. I wonder whether this makes sense to you, the translation. And these two screenshots actually got viral after the event or during the event because it says in Chinese here, simultaneous interpreting is being provided by Tengxun Fanyijun, the Tencent translation machine. And here we can see the original English speech transcription done by the machine, road and belt, and I believe there is some cooperation, so on and so forth. But in Chinese, I mean, in English, sorry, in its Chinese translation, it says China has one road or driveway and one belt, which literally means the belt that is being used on gentleman's waist. And here the translation is the road and conveying belt. By the way, for those who don't know, the Belt and Road Initiative is one of the biggest initiatives proposed by the Chinese government in order to reach out to developing world, to developing countries in developing particularly their infrastructure construction and other aspects. Okay, it is a big government sponsored initiative. So it is a proper noun or a specialized term rather than literally meaning a road or in terms of driveway or the belt on a man's waist or the conveyor's belt. So this has become a laughing stock, this piece of news. Then in another year, in May 2019, another big company, another internet technology giant, the Ifly Tech. The Ifly Tech claimed that its Chinese and English machine interpreting has reached the level of CATI level 2. Okay, so this is a picture of their new product launching press conference in which the president is speaking. So what is very interesting is that they actually used their own machine interpreting to interpret for the president's speech. So in Chinese, the president said something like 我们在去年底在全球第一次让我们机器通过测试literally meaning at the end of last year, we, for the first time in global history, let our machine pass the CATI examination or CATI test. By the way, CATI means it is the most authoritative accreditation test for translators and interpreters. It has 3 levels, and level 2 is the equivalent of a professional level in consecutive interpreting. Okay, so it will be very interesting to look at the interpreting done by the machine or machine interpreting. I've highlighted a few parts which will be funny and interesting to pay close attention. So it says we let our machine pass for the first time in the world at the end of last year. I wonder how you will understand the implication of this bit. We let our machine pass. It seems the machine, whether the machine pass or not is decided by their own company. Okay, and then it says, after passing the technical test of national translation is a qualification examination. So we can see there's a big problem with grammar here, which is organized by the Ministry of People's Society and State Foreign Language Bureau. Does it make sense to you? If it does not, I can provide literary translation about the original text, about the source text, which is Ministry of Human Resources. Okay, and the other agency is the National Foreign Language Publishing Bureau, or administration. Okay. The most authoritative translator qualification examination. Yeah. Then it says, after reaching the level of secondary transmission, in the original text, this is very crucial. It means CATI level 2, CATI level 2 in 3 levels, which means the professional level of consecutive interpreting. But here, obviously, it does not make any sense or good sense at all, right? Secondary transmission. This should be said to be far beyond our expectations at that time, which is the first time in human history. Okay, so they are claiming that their machine interpreting can and has passed the CATI test in level 2, which is equivalent of professional competence. Yet, actually, in interpreting the president's own speech on the site, it does a really lousy job. Okay, so these have been 2 pieces of hit news. And also in another event, in one of the biggest event about internet and technology, which is the World Internet Congress, one of the really big international event related to technology, held in Wuzhen, a tourist destination, a very popular one in China. The CEO of Sogou, another technology giant, claimed that the human interpreters working for the conference will lose their jobs soon. And he suggested later, right after the conference, in his Weibo, that the younger generation should not enter conference interpreting programs anymore. So, by the way, this is his Weibo, the equivalent of Twitter in China. He said something like, in employing a simultaneous interpreter, you've got to pay them 7,000 to 10,000 RMB, which is equivalent of 1,000 USD at least per hour. But this is not true. This is not true. And this kind of job is brain racking or brain burning. You've got to make a shift for every 15 minutes. Now is the time for the machine to get into the show. And I would like to suggest the younger generation should not enter conference interpreting anymore, because the Sogou translation machine is now being used in the World Internet Conference. Okay, so here we've got 3 pieces of breaking news and with really high media hype. But here, as an insider, as I said, I've been interpreter or interpreting practitioner for more than 2 decades. And I've also been doing interpreter training for quite a number of years, as well as doing interpreting research. So I would like to provide what we may call an insider's view. I'd like to demystify the mechanism or process of machine interpreting. Based on my observation, machine interpreting is actually automatic speech text translation. It's not speech translation, it's actually text, written text translation. Okay, and the whole process comprises 3 steps. In the first step, the machine does voice recognition or speech to text of the original speech or the source speech, and then it does text machine translation from source text in one language to target text in another language. Okay, so this at the core, this is actually written text machine translation rather than speech translation. Only on the left, you can see there's voice recognition, and on the right, or as the third step, there's voice synthesis, text to speech again. Okay. So when we look at the current state, though machine interpreting is still far from the quality of human interpreting, why there would be such breaking news in the past 2 or 3 years? I think that was because considerable improvements have been made in machine translation over the past few years, thanks to the developments in big data, big corpora, and natural language processing that has been enhanced by deep learning algorithms, in particular, speech recognition and automatic translation based on neural networking technology. As of now, machine interpreting is not ready yet for application in place of human, though some apps have been designed for simple everyday formulaic dialogues by several technology giants. For example, Microsoft Skype Translator, Google Pixel Buds, 讯飞小艺, and Baidu, which is another tech giant in China, Baidu Translator, and Sogou, traveling translator or a translator used for tourists. However, the prospect of development in AI-powered technologies along these paths should not be underestimated. Then, how shall we look at the prospect of development along these paths? If we use a forward-looking mindset, then maybe we should consider some serious question or academic questions. So while technologists in machine translation perceive and decipher the mechanism of interpreting in their technical approach, it is important for us interpreting practitioners, for us trainers, for us researchers to engage in the debate by providing the insider's perspective on the true nature of the process, mechanism, and purpose of interpreting. So 2 questions are at the core. First, how should interpreting be defined in light of the recent development in AI-powered technologies? Is it simply verbal transfer or textual transfer that can be easily done by the translation machine? Second, what components of the work done by human interpreters may be done or replaceable by the machine? Which other components of the work are irreplaceable if we think is irreplaceable? So first, let's revisit the epistemology of human and machine interpreting anyway. So first, let's start with a definition of interpreting. Interpreting, according to myself, is an oral bilingual processing activity of immediate transfer of information and meaning across languages, mediated by the interpreter in order to achieve communication between people across different languages and cultures. Then I'm proposing a multi-dimensional epistemological model of interpreting. So I'm giving you 3 concentric circles. At the core, in the circle, in the middle, Interpreting is complex cognitive operation, which is obvious to all interpreting students, trainers, and practitioners, right? For example, in doing consecutive interpreting while listening, you've got to do not only listening and analysis, but also short-term memory and note-taking. And I believe at the same time, actually, you are doing at least a partial reconstruction of your target uh, discourse. Interpreting is also immediate bilingual processing. That is why it requires very high level of bilingual competence in both of your working languages. And interpreting is also efficient information processing and discourse reproduction. In doing interpreting, actually, we need to comprehend and re-express not only the verbal information from the speaker, but also the paraverbal, nonverbal, and even situational information from the speaker. So this is the core of the interpreting behavior or activity. But not only that, I'm giving you the second circle. Interpreting is also interpersonal and cross-cultural communication, in which all the participants, including the speaker, the listener, or the audience, are all present along with the interpreter at the core. Interpreting in the modern society, is a professional activity. We know consecutive interpreting has become a profession after the Paris Peace Conference after World War I, while simultaneous interpreting has become formally a profession after the Nuremberg trial of Nazi criminals. And also, interpreting is a social and cultural activity. And here, I would like to highlight a few distinctive features of interpreting. So when we say interpreting is cognitive operation or management of cognitive resources or cognitive activity or cognitive processing, a distinctive feature is multitasking, right? While listening, you've got to do not only listening, but also analysis, but also short-term memory, but also note-taking. That is multitasking. I believe that is why nowadays interpreters have to receive professional training. They've got to enter professional programs like the one provided by your university and mine in order to be trained to be a fully fledged interpreter. And in doing bilingual processing and information processing, a distinct feature is immediacy of transfer. I believe this is a really big difference between interpreting and translating. In translating, you can ponder over one word for a long time in order to have the best choice, right? And you can also consult dictionaries, whether it's e-dictionary or paper dictionary, and you can also consult references. But in doing interpreting, you simply don't have the luxury of time. For example, in doing consecutive interpreting, you've got to start speaking right after the speaker. And in doing simultaneous interpreting, you've got to speak while listening. So immediacy is a really distinctive feature. And also singular delivery of the source text and target text. In doing interpreting, when you hear the speech from the speaker, you've got only one chance to do so, right? And when you speak as the interpreter, you've got also only one chance. And orality, of course, that is obvious. In addition to that, when we perceive interpreting as interpersonal and cross-cultural communication, co-presence of all participants, as I've mentioned, is a big feature of this activity. And let's not forget that whichever way we perceive interpreting, we can see the mediation role of the interpreter. Okay, so with this as the conceptual base, with the model as the analytic framework, we can look closely at different aspects or different layers of this activity to see whether some part of the work can be replaced by the machine, can be done by the machine. So first, if we see interpreting as information processing and cross-linguistic transfer, maybe the machine has an advantage in increasing the speed of cross-language transfer. Enhanced by big data, the machine also has a large repertoire of vocabulary, especially in specialized subject areas, if supported with specialized corpora. The machine has a good prospect in providing usable interpreting for simple and formulaic everyday dialogues, and for formulaic dialogues in telephone call centers and in tourism, etc. However, interpreting is never simple verbal transfer or linguistic transcoding. As Zelezkovich, one of the founders of interpreting theories, pointed out, the translation process in interpreting is not a direct conversion of the linguistic meaning of the source language to the target language, but a conversion from source language to sense. The intermediate link being nonverbal thought, which once consciously grasped can then be expressed in the target language. Such a widely recognized view of comprehending and conveying the sense as the core and essence of the interpreting process highlights the deficiency, I must say, of the transcoding view in machine interpreting. Also, as meaning is dependent on the text, it is not easy for the machine to achieve disambiguity in accordance with the context. When we look at interpreting as a kind of complex cognitive operation, AI-powered technologies have a good potential in facilitating the sub-processes of interpreting by human interpreters. For example, through voice recognition, a transcript can be created from the speech. With automatic extraction, prompts of keywords, numbers, and glossary can be generated for the working interpreter. Sorry for the typo, which might enhance accuracy in listening comprehension. And by using digital recorder or digital pen, as experimented by Orlando, the speech can be recorded, which can then be played back via an earphone and interpreted in the simultaneous mode by the interpreter. That means the conventional consecutive interpreting can be done in the simultaneous consecutive mode, which might enhance performance with more fluent delivery, closer source target correspondence, and fewer prosodic deviations, according to the observation by Hamidi and Perhaker. And also, tablets with a pen or iPad with pen or stylus can also be used to facilitate note-taking in consecutive interpreting. However, how such technologies can be integrated into the sub-processes of interpreting remains a big issue. As a cognitive operation, interpreting is already tightrope walking, according to Daniel Giller, a big guru in interpreting studies. The interpreter works close to saturation, both in the total requirements of cognitive resources and cognitive requirement about individual effort. The technologies mentioned above can easily become sources of additional cognitive load or even distraction, which is detrimental to the cognitive multitasking process required of the interpreter. Then, if we perceive interpreting as information processing and discourse production or reproduction, the information processed in interpreting is an integral composite of multi-channel and multi-modal layers, including verbal, paraverbal, nonverbal, situational, and background information. Both the information comprehended from the speaker and the discourse reproduced by the interpreter are communicated multimodally. Multimodal communication is an important feature of human interpreting. In this regard, the AI-enhanced machine may be developed further if we have a forward-looking mind to be able to process verbal information more accurately than now and faster than human interpreters. But information and meaning in interpreting are much more than verbal layer. How about the paraverbal, nonverbal, situational, and background or contextual layers? It seems that machine interpreting technicians have attended only to verbal information, while neglecting the fact that the other layers are also important constituents of information and meaning in communication. Also, in human interpreting, especially in consecutive interpreting, sometimes the clients would request a synthesized or summarized version. Will the machine be smart enough to make decisions about which are important that should be retained and which are trivial information that can be neglected? It is clear now that when interpreters process information and reproduce discourse, they are not working as a simple translation machine that can only translate or that only translate. Decision-making is actually required in information processing in interpreting. Then, if we perceive interpreting as interpersonal and cross-cultural communication, as interpersonal and cross-cultural communication is not only to inform, to give and convey information, but also to express and to operate. Interpreting is not only there to convey information, but also to express the speaker's emotions and feelings and to serve appellative communicative purpose as intended by the speaker. The interpreting tasks that are typical for human interpreters, such as the typical occasions of business talks, trade negotiations, political and diplomatic meetings on international occasions, are full of nuances, implications, humor, and cultural references and metaphors. Will the machine become smart enough to comprehend all of this and convey them in an equally nuanced manner in another language and culture? Depending on the interpreting settings, it is not only essential for the interpreter to convey information, emotions, and feelings of interlocutors, but also necessary for them to do discoursal mediation, interpersonal communicative mediation, cultural mediation, and even mediation of power relations, which is very salient in public service or interpreting. Again, decision-making is required in all of this. Then, can the machine be entrusted, even if it has become smart enough, with such mediation roles? Lastly, if we perceive interpreting as a social and cultural activity, interpreting as a professional and social cultural activity not only has immediate effect on the communicative events, although these would be more obviously felt when there is a breakdown of information, but not for most of the time when we interpreters are doing a great job, are working smoothly. Interpreting also has a big and long-lasting impact as a constituent of the social cultural events. For example, if you are interested, you may read an article published by myself and Tang Fang in 2018, which demonstrated that the interpreting activities in several major historical events in early Sino-British contexts in the 18th and 19th centuries had huge impact on the gains and loss of both countries, and even on the course of historical development in China. Business talks, trade negotiations, political and diplomatic meetings on international occasions, as well as the court, where it requires interpreting, are all high impact and high stakes settings that use formal, consecutive, and simultaneous interpreting, which involve not only decision making, but also ethics. Then, can we really rely on the machine in all these settings, even if it becomes smart enough in the future? So here, instead of providing definite answers, I have provided a framework for analyzing all these different issues in the debate. And also, instead of providing definite answers, I have been asking many questions. I hope in the future, the answers can be clearer. And I hope these can be stimulating to both practitioners, trainers, and also to technicians who are actually developing the smart machine with the help of AI-powered technologies. So, to sum up, when we look back at my model, I've highlighted a few elements that I believe it will not be easy for the machine to replace us, or maybe it will never be possible for the machine to replace human in these elements. That's it for my presentation, and here are the main reference items. Thank you. Now, I look forward to your comments and questions. Thank you.